Philadelphia, September 28, 1918. The morning air tastes of autumn and optimism. 200,000 people line Broad Street, shoulder to shoulder, breath to breath, waiting for the Liberty Loan parade to begin. Flags snap in the wind. Bands tune their instruments. Children perch on their fathers' shoulders to see over the crowd. The war in Europe is winding down. Victory feels close. Today is a celebration, a statement, a city coming together to show its strength. Within 72 hours, every hospital bed in Philadelphia will be full. Within a week, the morgues will overflow. Bodies will be stacked in warehouses because there are no coffins left. Families will paint red crosses on their doors, not to ward off plague like medieval peasants, but to warn neighbors. Do not enter, death is here. And the parade, this joyous gathering of 200,000 souls pressed together in celebration, will be remembered as one of the deadliest public health disasters in American history. But no one knows this yet. Right now, in this moment, they are simply people, living, breathing, touching. The virus moves through the crowd like an invisible tide, finding new hosts with every handshake, every embrace, every shared breath. It does not care about patriotism. It does not care about victory bonds. It cares only about replication, about survival, about finding the next body to inhabit. This is how the world changed, not with declaration or revolution, but with a parade, with a cough, with a fever that arrived in the night and, by morning, had killed the young and healthy in their beds. This is the story of the pandemic that killed more people than World War I. The pandemic that reshaped society, medicine, public health, and our understanding of what it means to be vulnerable. The pandemic we forgot. Until now. The year is 1918. The world is at war. Millions of young men are packed into trenches across Europe, living in mud and blood and conditions so filthy that disease is inevitable. But this is not trench fever. This is not typhus or dysentery or any of the familiar killers of wartime. This is something new, something that begins in military camps and spreads through supply lines, through ports, through cities, through the entire interconnected web of modern civilization that has made the world smaller and, in doing so, made it more dangerous. They call it the Spanish flu, but it does not start in Spain. Spain is neutral in the war, so Spanish newspapers are free to report the pandemic while the Allied and Central Powers censor their press to maintain morale. Spain becomes the messenger, and the messenger gets the blame. The virus itself probably originates in Kansas, at a military base called Camp Funston, where soldiers train before shipping out to Europe. Or maybe it starts in China, carried by laborers recruited to dig trenches. Or maybe France, or Britain. The origin is debated. What is not debated is the devastation. Between 1918 and 1920, the Spanish flu kills between 50 and 100 million people. The exact number is unknown because much of the world does not keep accurate death records. India loses 17 million. The United States loses 675,000. Europe loses millions more. Small villages in Alaska are wiped out entirely, every resident dead within days. In some places, there are not enough living to bury the dead. Mass graves are dug. Bodies are burned. The world becomes a charnel house. But this is not just another disease. This is not the old, the weak, the very young succumbing to illness. This flu kills the healthy, the strong. People in their 20s and 30s, in the prime of life, drop dead in the street. A woman goes to work in the morning feeling fine and is dead by evening. A soldier writes a letter home and dies before it can be mailed. The speed is terrifying. The randomness is worse. If you are drawn to histories that echo into our present, to pandemics that shape the world we live in, then stay with us. Because what happened in 1918 is not just history. It is prophecy. It is warning. It is the blueprint for every pandemic that followed, including the one we just lived through. The virus itself is an H1N1 influenza strain, though no one knows this in 1918 because virology is still in its infancy. Viruses have not even been definitively proven to exist. Doctors think the flu is caused by bacteria, by a pathogen called Pfeiffer's bacillus, and they search desperately for a bacterial cure while the viral pandemic rages unchecked. They are looking in the wrong place with the wrong tools, and people die because of it. What makes this flu uniquely deadly is something called a cytokine storm. The virus triggers the immune system to overreact, flooding the lungs with fluid and white blood cells. The stronger your immune system, the more violently it responds. This is why the young and healthy die. Their bodies betray them. Their strength becomes their weakness. Victims drown in their own fluids, their lips turning blue from oxygen deprivation, a condition called cyanosis that becomes the signature of the pandemic. People call them the living dead, the blue corpses, those who die with open eyes and mouths frozen in silent screams. But the horror is not just medical, it is social. Families disintegrate as parents die and children are orphaned. In some cities, 1 in 4 people falls ill simultaneously. Economies collapse, businesses close, entire industries shut down because there are not enough healthy workers. Trains stop running, mail stops being delivered. The infrastructure of modern life breaks down under the weight of mass sickness and death. And the fear is corrosive. People stop shaking hands, stop gathering, stop trusting their neighbors. Masks become mandatory in many cities, and those who refuse to wear them are fined or arrested. But the masks are useless, made of gauze too porous to stop a virus, worn improperly, removed in public when people think no one is watching. Compliance is spotty. Enforcement is inconsistent. The virus spreads anyway. Some cities act quickly. St. Louis closes schools, bans public gatherings, and implements strict quarantine measures. The curve of infections flattens. Deaths remain manageable, but Philadelphia holds its parade. And in the 2 weeks following that parade, 12,000 people die. The difference between action and inaction is measured in bodies, in mass graves, in children left without parents. This is when public health as we know it is born. Not gently, not through reasoned academic debate, but in the crucible of catastrophe. Cities create emergency hospitals. Medical schools graduate students early to fill the shortage of doctors. Women, previously excluded from many medical roles, are recruited as nurses and caregivers. The Red Cross mobilizes. Volunteers, many of whom will die from exposure, go house to house checking on the sick. Society reorganizes itself around the reality of pandemic. And then, as suddenly as it arrived, the virus mutates. By the spring of 1920, the pandemic is over. The virus does not disappear. It becomes endemic, less deadly, a seasonal illness instead of a civilizational threat. But it leaves scars, 50 to 100 million dead, entire families erased, economies shattered, trust broken. What fascinates and terrifies in equal measure is how quickly the world forgets. Within a decade, the Spanish flu fades from public memory. There are no memorials, no national days of remembrance, no monuments to the victims. World War I, which killed fewer people, dominates the historical narrative. The pandemic becomes a footnote, a ghost, something spoken of in whispers if spoken of at all. Why? Some historians argue it is too painful, the scale of death too vast to process. Others suggest it is overshadowed by the war, by the economic boom of the Roaring Twenties, by the desperate desire to move forward and forget. Some point to censorship during the war, which suppressed pandemic reporting and created a culture of silence that persisted afterward. Whatever the reason, the forgetting is nearly total. By the time the next pandemic arrives, in 2020, most people have never heard of the Spanish flu. History has failed to teach its lesson. But the pandemic does reshape the world, even if the reshaping is invisible. Modern public health systems emerge from the chaos. The concept of social distancing is born. The idea that governments have a responsibility to protect citizens from disease becomes embedded in policy. Medical research accelerates. The search for vaccines and antivirals becomes a priority. Within decades, the flu vaccine will be developed, saving countless lives. But in 1918, there is nothing. No treatment, no cure, only isolation, quarantine, and hope. The pandemic also accelerates social change. Women, who serve as nurses and caregivers, prove their indispensability and gain ground in the fight for suffrage. The United States passes the 19th Amendment in 1920, granting women the right to vote, partly in recognition of their service during the war and pandemic. Labor movements gain strength as workers demand better conditions and health care. The concept of employer-provided health insurance begins to take root. Society becomes more collective, more aware of its interdependence. But there is a darker legacy too. The pandemic feeds into eugenics movements, with some arguing that the sick and weak should be left to die to strengthen the race. It fuels xenophobia, as immigrants and minorities are blamed for spreading disease. It creates a generation of orphans, many of whom grow up in institutions, scarred by loss and neglect. The trauma is real even if it is not acknowledged. In remote Alaska, entire Inuit villages are decimated. In some cases, the virus kills so quickly that bodies freeze before they can be buried, preserved in permafrost for a century. In 1951, scientists will exhume one of these bodies and extract viral RNA, using it to reconstruct the 1918 virus in a lab. This research will prove controversial. Some see it as essential to preventing future pandemics. Others see it as madness, recreating one of the deadliest pathogens in history. But the research continues, driven by the belief that understanding the past is the key to surviving the future. The Spanish flu also changes how we think about war and death. World War I is brutal, industrial, mechanized. Soldiers die in trenches from machine guns and poison gas. But the flu kills more soldiers than combat. It kills civilians in numbers that dwarf battlefield casualties. It reveals that the greatest threat to humanity is not armies or weapons, but invisible pathogens that care nothing for borders or allegiances. This realization shapes military strategy, international cooperation, and pandemic preparedness for the next century. Yet, despite all this, the forgetting persists. When COVID-19 emerges in 2020, the world is shocked, unprepared, caught off guard by a pandemic that echoes 1918 in eerie detail. The same debates about masks and lockdowns, the same tension between individual freedom and collective safety, the same patterns of denial, panic, and resilience. History does not repeat, but it rhymes, and we failed to learn the words. There are lessons here, buried in the mass graves and forgotten archives of 1918. Lessons about preparedness, about the cost of denial, about the importance of leadership, of science, of trust. Lessons about how fragile our modern world is, how quickly civilization can unravel when a microscopic enemy exploits our interconnectedness. Lessons we ignored at our peril. The Spanish flu killed more people than the Black Death, more than World War I and World War II combined. It is one of the deadliest events in human history. And yet, if you ask a random person on the street about it, they might shrug. They might vaguely recall something from a history class. They might confuse it with another pandemic. The forgetting is so complete that when COVID-19 arrived, many people genuinely believed it was the first pandemic of the modern era. They had no context, no frame of reference, no understanding that this had happened before and would happen again. This is the danger of forgetting. Not just that we lose the past, but that we lose the lessons it could teach us. That we stumble blindly into the same traps, make the same mistakes, pay the same price in lives and suffering. The Spanish flu reshaped our world in profound ways, but because we forgot it, we failed to build on its lessons. We failed to prepare. We failed to remember that pandemics are not aberrations. They are inevitabilities. And yet, There is something redemptive in the way humanity responded in 1918. In the midst of death and chaos, people cared for each other. Volunteers risked their lives to help strangers. Doctors worked until they collapsed. Nurses held the hands of dying patients who had no family left. Communities came together, even as they were forced apart. There was cruelty, yes. There was denial and blame and all the worst impulses of human nature. But there was also courage, compassion, resilience. In Philadelphia, after the parade, after the deaths, after the morgues overflowed and the mass graves were dug, the city rebuilt. Schools reopened. Factories resumed production. Life went on. Not because the pandemic was forgotten, but because forgetting was a survival mechanism. Because moving forward required letting go. Because to dwell on the enormity of the loss was to risk paralysis. But now, more than a century later, we can afford to remember. We must remember, because the Spanish flu is not just history. It is prologue. The viruses that caused it still exist, mutating, evolving, waiting for the right conditions to reemerge. We live in a world more interconnected than 1918, more vulnerable, more capable of both spreading disease and fighting it. The next pandemic is not a question of if, but when. So what do we do with this knowledge? Do we live in fear? Do we retreat into isolation? Or do we learn? Do we prepare? Do we build systems that can respond quickly and effectively? Do we invest in science, in healthcare, in the infrastructure of prevention? Do we remember that the cost of forgetting is measured in lives? The Spanish flu reshaped our world in ways we still do not fully understand. Killed a generation. It changed societies. It revealed the fragility of civilization and the strength of human resilience. It taught us that we are all vulnerable, all connected, all dependent on each other for survival. And then we forgot. But forgetting is a choice. Remembering is a choice. And choosing to remember, choosing to learn, choosing to prepare, that is how we honor the 50 to 100 million who died. That is how we ensure their deaths were not in vain. That is how we reshape our world, not through catastrophe, but through wisdom. The parade in Philadelphia happened. The deaths happened. The forgetting happened. But the story does not end there. It ends here, with us, with our choice to remember or to forget, with our choice to learn or to repeat, with our choice to honor the past by building a better future. The Spanish flu is gone, but its lessons remain, written in the mass graves of 1918, whispered in the archives of forgotten victims, echoed in every pandemic that followed. The question is, are we listening? If you have stayed with us through this journey into forgotten history, thank you. These stories matter. These lessons matter. The dead of 1918 cannot speak, but we can speak for them. We can remember them. We can learn from them. And in doing so, we can reshape our world, not through tragedy, but through choice. The world changed in 1918. It changed again in 2020. It will change again. The only question is whether we will be ready, whether we will remember, whether we will learn. The Spanish flu was forgotten, but it does not have to stay forgotten. This is how we remember. This is how we learn. This is how we honor those who died. By refusing to let their deaths disappear into silence, by keeping their memory alive, by learning the lessons they paid for with their lives. Philadelphia, September 28, 1918. 200,000 people gather for a parade. Within days, thousands are dead. But their story does not end with death. It ends with us, with our choice, with our memory. Remember them. Remember the pandemic. Remember the lessons, because the next time may be soon, and the cost of forgetting is too high. The Spanish flu reshaped our world. We forgot. We paid the price. We can choose differently. We must choose differently. The dead demand it. The future depends on it. This is how the world changed. This is how it will change again. This is the story we cannot afford to forget. Remember,